Good morning. Welcome to Books at the Bottom of the Stairs. My name's Lorraine. Today I'm doing something I haven't done before, which is one of the book tags. I was tagged by Gina over at Gina Stainer Books, who I'll link in the description below. And I just generally, Tuesday is the day that I do my regular content, so I never get around to doing the tags just because I've always seems to have content, so it's not something I'm like focusing on. Anyways, it's the first time I've ever been tagged, so I thought, well, I'll just go along with the party. So this rereading tag was started over on Scallydandling About Books back in August of 2020. It was their original tag, and they had quite a lot of interesting questions that they were asking at the time, and I think as it has evolved, it's come down to a much more abbreviated set of questions. And so I'm going to go with two of their questions, first of all, and then do the abbreviated questions. So the first one that they're asking is, what book that I have reread is better upon rereading? The answer for that is A Tree Grows in Brickland by Betty Smith, published almost 1943. It's an oldie but a goodie. I read it when I was probably around the age of the protagonist, and it was a good book. It was a good fictional story. I connected with the young girl. She had a dad who had drinking problems, and they were in a different economic strata than we were, but same kinds of issues. And I just related. She had some good strategies for dealing with the sort of on again, off again parenting that was taking place, and the oppression of the mom, and just coming out of a situation with an alcoholic parent. And so there were a lot of things that I understood or could meld with. And so I reread it about, I'm like close to 8 years ago now. It was my book club did one about reading. We were each asked to read a YA classic, and this was my choice. So upon reading it a second time, it like really resonated for me. So it was for sure a better improved book than originally the first time. The other question they ask is, which books have I read that are worse upon rereading? And I'm going to say generally all of them. I've had, well, there were some books that I really enjoyed during not university, more so high school, I think, that I decided to go back and reread, and except for one, which I'll get to, they just all kind of disappointed. I don't know what it was. Maybe I just had more enthusiasm when I was in high school, or it was just a bit more of a new thing, a new reader in the classics. So there was that kind of enthusiasm, and it's all new and exciting, and then in the meantime, I don't know how many thousands of books I have read in similar genres of I've read other Thomas Hardy, or I've read other Charles Dickens, and so on. So that shiny what's that, honeymoon the shiny honeymoon period just rubs off a little bit. So when I've read a few again, they just don't resonate. There was another book group challenge, which was to reread something you had really enjoyed as a kid, and again, almost all of us said, yeah, that was kind of disappointing. And then I just don't, anything that's sort of written after the 1980s, I just don't tend to reread. So I just doesn't seem to work for me. Then there was, let me see, most often reread book, and for me that would be Anne of Green Gables, which I'll talk about in a second. Okay, so they had a lot of other interesting questions, and so if you want to go back to the original and see what they were asking and so on, that would be, fun for you. I'll link that below, as I say. So the first question in the more current version of the tag is, what is a cozy reread for you? And for me, that would be what's better? The Anne of Green Gables series. Now, I got this as a kid, and I'm afraid to pull it out. You know, everything's kind of swollen, and everything's cracked, and so I'm not sure that I would today reread the actual book that I have, but I think I'll go out and see if I can get a new copy, just because this all the glue has failed, and I can tell which one I read the most, because I don't know if you can see that, but it's all split and everything, and that one not too bad, and that one hardly at all. So clearly I have read Anne of Green Gables over and over, and I think we read it just maybe 4 years ago. We read it as a read aloud, and I think that's the first time, because we were doing it as a read aloud, that I heard the poetics of her writing. When I read it just silently to myself, some of the TV versions have come into my brain a little bit, and I've been on Prince Edward Island, so some of the actual real geography comes into my mind, and been to Charlottetown and so on, and back in the day there was, when I was around 12, there was the ferry was the only way you could get across to PEI, and now there's the bridge. So some of the experiences I've had as a human being have been a bit connected to what Anne has experienced, and that moment where she takes the slate and cracks it over Gilbert's head. I didn't do that, but I came up with a fairly creative way of attacking the boy who was really bugging me, and I got into so much shit. I mean, like, a lot. And the evil part of me still loves it. I'm so sorry. It just goes to show what my moral fiber is like. Not too good. It was one of the sweetest moments in my life, where I took on a bully and won. Well, you know, you're going to have to buy me a bottle of wine and come over and have a chat with some hors d'oeuvres, and I'll tell you the real story. But anyways, Anne of Green Gables and I were like this for years and years. And my husband tells the story about how there are certain women that have come through his life professionally, and he goes, "Did you like Anne of Green Gables as a girl?" And they go, "Yes, yes." And he goes, "I just knew." So there's a certain kind of girl who really, really resonated with Anne. So the other one that I really like and to reread, isn't it here? Yes, not quite as intensely, is Huck Finn. This very much is a book that I've read several times. I really enjoy it. I've never read it with an eye to the reasons that it has been banned. I think, you know, once I read it, and that was kind of in the back of my mind, thinking, like, why is it being banned? Why is it being banned? And then quickly got lost in the story. So in every case, I just have been completely lost in the language and the imagery and the idea of being afloat on a huge Mississippi River. I've just never kind of gone into things deeply. It's been entirely like a physical experience for me. So that's why I enjoy it so much. Okay, for fun, the next question is, what do you reread for fun? And for me, that's The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, and that is written by Barbara Robinson. It's an American book. It's very short, and so that makes it a great Christmas read. And I don't read it every Christmas. I read it, I don't know, maybe about once every 5 years. It was first published in 1972. And this is the story of the Herdmans. They're the worst kids in the history of the world. They lie, steal, smoke cigars, swear, and hit little kids. So no one is prepared when this outlaw family invades church one Sunday and decides to take over the annual Christmas pageant. None of the Herdmans has ever heard of Christmas Story before. Their interpretation of the tale, the wise men are a bunch of dirty spies and Herod needs a good beating, has a lot of people up in arms, but it will make this year's pageant the most unusual one anyone has seen, and just possibly the best one ever. And it's hilarious. And I think it resonates with all denominations, because if you've been a kid going to any kind of Sunday school, sooner or later you've encountered the pageant. And I'm think I'm pretty sure that in my Catholic childhood, the kids, I don't remember ever getting into a play, but I do remember having to do choirs and stuff like that. So I don't know whether the Catholics handle it differently or not. Or if it was just the priest that we had that was like, I don't want any kids up there. So that's the one that I like to go to quite regularly. And the other one, no, I think that's it for that. Another one is palette cleansing, which I do not have a copy of. And for me, that is Where the Lilies Bloom. And that has been written by Vera Cleaver and her husband. And I think that was published in the late 50s, early 60s. And I think there's been a movie done of it. I'm sure there's been a movie done of it. And the movie is adorable. And we've got a young girl. I've even spoken about it on this channel because I read it not so long ago and talked to you about it. And so it's a family that is deeply impoverished in the Appalachians. And Dad has recently died, but the kids are trying to keep that information away from other adults, because if other adults will just come in and break them up and put them into social housing. It's sort of at the beginning of the times when not social housing, I'm sorry, social workers will put them out into foster care. So they're trying to protect themselves from that, and they've got a way of gathering herbs up in the mountains that they can sell, which helps to keep the groceries on the table. And they've got cow. Do they have a cow? Anyways, there's a fella up the road who wants to court the eldest daughter. And one of the last things the dad had said was, don't let him get his hands on her. And so it's the middle girl, whose name escapes me at the moment, who is trying to do all the things that Dad said to do and keep the littler ones happy and fed. And it's just all sorts of shenanigans to thwart the person who's doing the courting. And they manage to they pull the wool over his eyes quite a bit. He's more determined about the courting than he is about trying to outsmart the kids. And so it's a sweet story, and the movie is super well done. I think you can't go wrong if you choose either one. So that's palette cleansing. A series that I would like to reread, and that one is actually on my to-do list this fall, because it is the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend. And book 4 is due in the fall. And I have the first 3 here, all in paperback. The Hunt for Morrigan Crow. It hasn't been that long since this series started. She's been able to get them out fairly lickety-split. And so, when was it first published? 2020. So that, like, pretty good for her to get them out that quick. I think what I would like to do before the 4th one is read is just reread, and because I do enjoy a series binge, and so I will reread 1, 2, 3 before I treat myself to reading number 4. And they're each one's fairly big, but as a reread I tend to go fairly fast. And how many? I was just looking to see if there was a page count. It's about 540 pages. I'd say they're all more or less like that. And this young Morrigan Crow is the protagonist, and people who want Morrigan Crow for her magical capacities, which she's pretty unaware of. And so someone shows up on her birthday, the day that she's supposed to die, and her family is just so indifferent to her that they're not even, like, she's up in her bedroom, I guess she'll be dead in the morning kind of thing. They're just indifferent. So she's pretty geared to going off with someone who's going to save her from this fate, and she ends up in this magical land, and there's this whole piece of the magical land and the not magical land sort of they're not supposed to cross over, but there is crossover, and so there's that whole magic coming into that place where it's causing chaos, and then people who want to take over both worlds, and there's some really good, juicy, evil people in the whole series. And yeah, I'd say that each book has had its own conundrum and evil people, and each book, each book, a different Morgan and different characters come to the fore, but it's still a similar group of characters who are present for each book, so you get to know them each a little bit more deeply. So I have great hopes for book number 4. All right, the next one is, what would be an emotional reread for you? Now, this is another book that I have just finished, and so I'm not in the mood to reread it right now, but I think that this would be my answer to that question. It is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, who's still a fairly young author, sort of, late 30s, and Irish, and a poet. And this is taking place in 1985. The weeks leading up to Christmas, Bill Furrow, a coal merchant and family man, faces his busiest season. Early one morning, while delivering an order to the local convent, Bill makes a discovery which forces him to confront both his past and the complicit silences of a town controlled by the church. My goodness, it was such a good book. Bill is so well drawn. The community is so well drawn. The nuns are very sharply drawn. The issue that he's confronted is very sad, tragic, and also we've got the knowledge. We have the same knowledge that Bill does, that his family is not going to be too happy if he does what he thinks he wants to do. So that's part of his crisis, is like, is solving this conundrum, is that more important than what his family and community would want him to do, or is it the other way around? It's quite a short book, and she really draws out your compassion and your empathy and sadness, and I don't want to say any more because it's such a short book that it can be easy to create spoilers. All right, a comfort read. Well, this one might get me in trouble. Where'd it go? This is a book that came to me long before I had any kind of notions that literature could be a part of the idea that Black lives don't matter. And that in my world, it wasn't that I didn't think that Black lives didn't matter. It's just that I was completely unaware of the different ways that Black lives were not being raised up. And so that happens with literature, as book people were all quite aware. And as the efforts to change that have, flourished, and the publishing industry is responding in other parts of the world, and in many places things are well on the way to betterment. There are just as many places that aren't. And so I don't know where this book lies, because I'll just show it to you. Uncle Remus, and A.B. Frost is the illustrator. Joel Chandler Harris is the author. And we read this, my husband and I read this when I was pregnant with our first. And he's a great mimic. And so he could go through, and he had the voices of Brer Fox and Brer Rabbit and all the others, Brer Terrapin, and he could have a different, he still couldn't do it, he can have a different voice for each character, and he just brought these stories to life. And I didn't have a very easy first pregnancy. I spent an awful lot of time trying to prevent, and it was in August and heat waves in Toronto, and I just spent so much time trying to not be swollen up, standing in pails of water with ice cubes in it. So I was pretty uncomfortable. And so this was funny. And neither one of us really thought about the cultural context. Neither one of us thought about, were we contributing to the infantilizing any people. So this was something that it was just completely read on the surface, no deeper thought for either of us. So, as time has gone by, we've become more aware of things, and yet this is the story that we reach for every time one of us is seriously sick. So a couple of years ago, I had blood clots and was bedridden, and doing my best to just kind of stay, as happy and as undemanding a patient as possible. And he didn't read it to me, I read it to myself. It came back out because it was about as much as I could do with almost no oxygen in my lungs, and I could read a short story and just, kind of lie there, and they're only 3 or 4 pages long, and it was very comforting. So where this book stands now in terms of its place in the cultural history of it was Joel Chandler Harris is a white author, and he's gone back and he's spoken with people who were still the storytellers at the time. So it's a little bit like collecting the folk tales out of the Appalachians, but there's all that business of who has power and who doesn't have power, and what's actually authentic and what the story collector wanted to hear. And so it's just become a deeply layered book. So it's not a book that I feel I can recommend as a book without a lot of caveats attached to it, but in terms of my personal reading, that is the answer to what was a comfort read. Okay, I have a couple of other books that I thought were worth mentioning. Well, really only one, I think. And for me, this is a second palate cleanser. And I don't read it very often because it actually turns out to be like a full body cleanse. And that is Calvin and Hobbes. And I have pretty much I think I've got everything that's been published. And I prefer the earlier ones, the ones where he's in the spaceship, not so much. But I start to read this, and I just start out reading it on the bed or on the floor, because before you know it, I am laughing so hard I can't breathe. The tears, my stomach, everything. I'm in sweating. So that's why I try to save it for about once every 10 years. And I'll just read one book, and that'll be good for a little while. I tend to read it around the winter time, when I'm like January, February, when I'm getting really housebound. It's such an endorphic kick that, between the laughing and the crying, that I have a good nap afterwards. It's, I guess it's my way of going downhill skiing. So, and he's got, if you've read Calvin and Hobbes, Calvin has some pretty interesting life philosophies. So does Hobbes. And the parents are just so befuddled. I have a kid, actually now both of them, now that they're both sort of fluently adults and articulate, and they're both very much Calvin. And I think that being the befuddled parent was for sure my role. So I totally recommend Calvin and Hobbes as something to read when you need a huge lift-me-up. Well, that's it for me right now, and thank you to Gina for tagging me. And I'm not going to tag anyone else. I tend not to follow people who do tags, so I don't really know who would recommend them. Well, that's actually not a true statement. I do follow people who do tags. I just tend not to pay attention to those particular videos. So I don't really have anyone that I can recommend. If you want to do this tag yourself, that's great. I think it's a fun tag. And it's kind of inspired me that I think probably towards the end of winter, or I'm sorry, the end of November, I think I'm going to do another one similar, which is books that I would like to reread. And the winter's a good time for rereading, because you kind of buckle down with a big pile of books and nommy-noms, and away you go. So that's it for me. I hope all your reading dreams and adventures continue to come true, and I will see you no, wait a minute. I don't know when I'll see you, because I think this is going to be out of order. So one way or another, I just hope everything's great for you today. Bye-bye for now.